Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkenalkan, nama saya Loise dengan NPM 213510184. Di sini saya akan menyimak dan mempelajari materi dari pertemuan 10, yaitu Node.js. Baiklah, langsung saja kita mulai.
So Node.js is very fast and scalable due to its architecture and the V8 engine. It's also pretty popular. I think it's something like 6.3 million websites use Node.js, and it's used by companies like Netflix, Uber, Link, popular option for startups, and over what we're going to cover in this course and in kind of the order we're going to do it in. So, of course, we're talking about now what Node.js is. I'll talk a little bit about how it works under the hood as well. We're going to install it, set up a project, set up the package.json, which is a kind of like a manifest file. We're going to look at some custom modules, which are basically just files that we can create, and we can import and export functions and data from those files, to and from those files. And there's really two module systems that we can use. There's CommonJS, which is kind of Node.js's native system, and then you can also use ES modules, which is the import syntax that you use with React, Vue, and all the front-end JavaScript stuff. So I'm going to show you both, but ultimately we're going to stick with ES modules. That's just what I prefer. It's more modern. Now, when it comes to the core modules that Node includes, I think the HTTP module is one of the most important to kind of understand when you're getting started. And this is what allows you to create a server and accept requests and give responses. So a big part of this tutorial will be using the HTTP Express, my Express modules. So, how is that part of the course? We're even going to look at some custom middleware, which are functions that sit between incoming requests and outgoing responses. Now, when it comes to some of the other core modules, we're going to be going over those in the second part of the course. So the file system module, path module, URL, events, things like that. So I'll cover the basics of all those as well. Now, one common mistake that I see people do is jump to Node.js too quickly. Before learning Node.js, you should have a good understanding of JavaScript. So, of course, you should know all the fundamentals, variables, functions, loops, objects, classes. You should have a good understanding of that stuff, most definitely. Now, I'd also suggest that you understand asynchronous programming, so you should know things like callbacks, promises, the async await syntax. Chances are you'll be building web applications and JSON APIs with Node.js, so you should understand how HTTP works, the request response cycle. You should know about HTTP methods like get, post, put, delete. You should know the common status codes, 200, 404, 500, things like that. And you will be learning more about this stuff as you learn about Node.js, and even in this very video. Now, you probably are coming from front-end JavaScript, so you've probably worked with APIs, JSON APIs. You've probably consumed them. Well, now you're going to be creating them most likely. So it helps if you already have a basic understanding of how they work. Like I said, HTTP methods and status codes and all that. And then NPM, the Node Package Manager, you probably have some experience with. I mean, if you're using React or any front-end framework, you're usually installing that stuff with NPM. And talk a little bit about how Node.js works. And I'm not going to go too deep into this because I want this to be practical and easily digestible, but you should have a basic idea of how Node works under the hood. So as I said, Node is built on top of the V8 JavaScript engine, which is the same engine that powers Google Chrome. Other browsers have their own engines, like Firefox has SpiderMonkey, Safari has JavaScript Core. The V8 engine is written in C++, and it's what takes your JavaScript code and converts it into machine code so that your computer can understand. And Node has taken this engine and extended it to work on the server side. Now, Node.js is what we call non-blocking, which means that it doesn't wait around for I/O operations, which are input-output operations. And those are things like network calls, file system operations, database operations. And instead of blocking the execution of code while waiting for these things to happen or these things to complete, Node.js uses events and callbacks, and this allows it to handle thousands of connections at the same time. And this is why Node.js is so fast and efficient. Now, in Node.js, there's a single main thread that executes your JavaScript code, and you can think of a thread as a set of instructions that your computer executes. And in a single-threaded environment, there's only one set of its instructions that are executed at a time. This is different from multi-threaded environments where you have multiple threads that can execute different parts of your code simultaneously. So Node.js uses something called the event loop, which is a mechanism that allows Node to perform non-blocking I/O operations. And when you make a network request, for example, Node.js doesn't wait for that request to complete. Instead, it continues to execute the rest of your code. And when that request does complete, it triggers a callback, which is then added to the event queue. And the event loop picks up the callback and then executes it. So I know this is a little tough to understand. So the analogy that I like to kind of describe and what helped me is to imagine the event loop as one of those giant revolving doors at the mall or something like that. And each person represents a task or operation initiated. And as a person walks into the building that's initiating a task, instead of waiting for them to complete their business inside the mall, we'll call that the task execution, Node.js keeps the revolving door spinning, signifying the event loop. Now, as each person finishes their task in the building, they exit the revolving door, representing the completion of their task, and the event loop or the door keeps the flow going, handling incoming tasks and ensuring that the program's execution remains uninterrupted. So when a callback executes in Node.js, it's akin to a person executing that revolving door, and it would mark the completion of their task. And while the event loop keeps processing and flowing, it waits for others to enter. Now, I don't know if that analogy helps or if it just confused you more, but that's kind of how it works. And it's not that important for you as a beginner to understand how everything works under the hood right now. It's more learning the syntax and how to handle incoming requests and send responses and things like that. Now, as far as what Node is used for, it's used for a lot of things. So, of course, building APIs, and this could be RESTful APIs, serve JSON data, but we can also serve HTML pages, and we can use different template engines like EJS, Mustache. There's all types of engines that you can use to serve HTML pages, dynamic pages. It's also great for real-time applications like chat, real-time games, collaboration tools, things like that. Microservices. So microservices are small independent services that work together. I actually just did a crash course on microservices if you're interested. Command line tools. You can build CLIs, command line interfaces. Bots. So, for example, you could build a Twitter bot or a bot for Slack or Discord that you can use for complex routing and serving dynamic content, or just a simple static file server. What Node.js is not great for is CPU-intensive applications. So as we talked about, Node.js is single-threaded and uses an event loop, which makes it great for I/O operations, but not so great for CPU-intensive operations. So if you're doing a lot of heavy computation and things like that, you probably want to look more into like Python, Ruby, Java, and other server-side languages. But that's it for the slides. Now what I want to do is jump in. We'll talk a little bit about installation, which is very simple, and we'll start to set up a project, and then we'll go from there. All right, guys, so this is the official Node.js website, nodejs.org, and as far as installation goes, it's very simple. If you're on Windows or Mac, you can just simply go to the site, click download the LTS, which is the if you want. There might be some extra features there, but I usually suggest using the LTS. And then you can just run that file. I already have it installed in this machine, so I'm not going to run it, but it's just like any other installer. Just go through it, and then Node should be installed. Now, if you're on Mac, you can also use Homebrew, and of course, if you're on Linux, you can use your, whatever the package manager for your distro is, and get it installed that way. And then you just want to open up a terminal or a command line prompt and just do node -- version, and that will show you the version that's installed. And Node.js comes with NPM, which is the Node Package Manager, which you can use to install third-party packages, and you can just make sure that that's installed as well. Now, Node.js does come with a REPL, which stands for Read Eval Print Loop, and it's basically just a command line environment to run Java. Can type is have to do examples. You're doing front-end Java, so if we do console log hello world, and run that, it's going to just
So you want to be a software engineer at Google? Go to algoexpert.io. Pick a question, read the prompt, write some code.
spit it out to the terminal, to the console, and undefined just means that there's nothing being returned from this line. Now you can also create variables, like we can say name, John, and obviously I get undefined because that doesn't actually return anything. If I do a console.log of the variable of name, then I should see John. You can also create functions, like I could create, we'll use a one-line arrow function here called greet, and we'll just return, let's just return, we can put some backticks in here and say hello, and then put our name variable, and then we can call that function, and we get hello John. All right, so like I said, you're probably not going to use this much, but it is there for you to test out code or whatever you want. So you can just do control or command work in. You can either use your Explorer or File Manager, or you can use the terminal and just do make directory. And I'm going to call this Node.js-crash-2024. Okay, and then I'm just going to CD into that folder, and then from there I'm going to open my text editor with code dot. If you're not using VS Code, just open that folder up in whatever editor you're using. So close that, and now I'm just going to use the integrated terminal for any commands that I want to run. Now, 99% of the time, the first thing you're going to do when you're starting a new Node.js project is create a package.json file. So we can do that by using an npm command. So in the terminal, we can say npm init. And there's going to be some questions asked, and if you wanted to skip those questions, you could just add -y, but I'm going to go through those just so you can see what they are. So the package name, whatever's in parentheses, is the default, so you can just hit enter to accept that version. Description, I'm just going to say Node.js crash course code. And then the entry point, which is like your main file, index.js, that's fine. And then you can just enter through this stuff. If you want, you can put your own name, and then for license, I usually put MIT. And then enter, and that will create a package.json file for you. So you never have to create this manually. And this has, basically the stuff that we just answered. And then it also has scripts. So basically you can create what are called npm scripts to do certain things like start your server, stop it, run tests, all kinds of stuff. And I'll get more into that a little later. So now that we have a package.json file, the next thing you would usually do is create an entry point, which is your main file, the file you're going to run. Usually when dealing with Node.js, or any language really, you're going to have a project structure with files and folders, and usually you have one entry point, and the other stuff is just imported into other files. So let's create a file. I'm going to call it index.js, and you might see this as app.js or server.js. I usually like to use index. Now from here, we can just type JavaScript. So I can do a console log. Let's just say hello world. Now, since we have Node.js installed on this machine, I can run this file from my terminal by saying node and then the name of the file, which is index.js. Make sure you're in the correct directory, and you'll see hello world printed to the console. And you don't even have to do the .js. We could just do index, which is the name of the file, and then that runs it as well. Okay, and you can put any JavaScript that you want in here. Okay, now there are some differences. So for instance, when you're in the browser environment, and I'm assuming that a lot of you are coming from the front end, so in the browser you have this window object, right? If I were to run it, you'll see I get an error. It says window is not defined. That's because there's no browser, which is similar, but it obviously doesn't represent a browser window. It represents just the global object, and you can see that there's a bunch of stuff on this as well, such as set timeout, set interval. These are actually not part of JavaScript. They're part of the web API in the browser, but they're also available in Node.js because of this global object. All right, now there's also not a document object, so there's no DOM, right, because there's no document. The document pertains to the browser and its environment, so that's not available, but there is a process object. So that pertains to the current process that's being run. So you can see there's a bunch of stuff on here that you can get as well. You can get environment variables, things like that, and I'll talk more about the process later. All right, so yeah, so those are basically, it's just the environment is different, but as far as the JavaScript language goes, it's all the same. And that's what's great about building full stack when you're using like React or Vue or anything like that. You're writing the same language on the front end as you are on the back end, which is nice, rather than doing JavaScript on the front end and then Python or PHP or something on the back end, which is also fine, but I like to have it all, all in one. Now, I want to talk about modules. So usually, like I said, you'll have a structure of files. So let's go ahead and create a utils.js file. And let's say that this is just a file that has random functions that we want to use around our site. So I'll create a function. Let's call this generate random number. And that's exactly what it's going to do. So we'll make it really simple. We'll just say math.floor. So we're going to
Baiklah, itu tadi video nyimak dari saya. Terlebih dan terkurang, saya mohon maaf. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.